Hey guys, back again with another video, this time a review on Metroid Samus Returns for the 3DS. And I was originally going to do a Metroid series review, and I actually did record one, a whole hour's worth, and iMovie decided to crash on me and delete everything, with no way of recovering it. In fact, I don't even know what happened. Now, it usually crashes a lot for me because my laptop's really terrible, but it's usually back. Like, all the footage I recorded and audio is usually back when I reopen iMovie, but this time it wasn't there. And I tried everything. I just could not salvage anything. So, yeah, really depressing, actually. So, I really don't want to redo it. So, honestly, I'm going to wait till Metroid Prime 4 comes out, and then around then I'll do my whole series review. But I wanted to at least get some video out, because I wanted to talk about this game in particular. And how much I really enjoyed it, and how surprised I am by it. Because, I guess we'll start with the reaction to it when it first got announced. Obviously, a lot of people being excited because it's the first 2D Metroid since Zero Mission back in 2004, which is insane when you think about it. But when it was revealed the developer was going to be Mercury Steam, I gotta say, I was pretty worried. I do not care for Mercury Steam's games. I've tried a bunch of them, and I've hated almost every single one. I know Lords of Shadow, people love that game. I'll never understand it. I hated like every second of that game. And then Lords of Shadow 2 happened to even be worse. And I only got maybe like halfway through that game before I gave up. Clive Barker's Jericho is abysmal. Like, it's a really bad game. Mirrors of Fate is horrible as well. I really didn't like that. I do not like what they did with Castlevania. So, yeah, I was definitely worried with Samus Returns, but I don't know, maybe it was Nintendo helping them along, but I think this is by far their best game. In fact, this game is actually amazing. I have very little to complain about with it, actually. It is interesting comparing it with the fan remake that came out. I loved that game. It actually was pretty high on my Game of the Year list. I still don't know whether I prefer this or that. I think I'm leaning towards this game, actually, now that I've finished it and thought about it a little bit. I know there's probably plenty of videos comparing the two, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but more comparisons, I guess, with the original Metroid 2 on the Game Boy. So we'll start the review out with the story. Not too much to say here. It's very minimal on story, which is good. That's just how I like my Metroid games. A cutscene in the beginnings, a few little cutscenes here and there, especially before bosses. But general story, as with Metroid 2, you're landing on the planet SR388, I think it's called. And then basically you're sent there by the Galactic Federation to kind of investigate and annihilate all the Metroids. Obviously there's a little more than that, but that's what kind of gets you going. And it's minimal, but it works, and it's what I like in a Metroid game, especially a side-scrolling Metroid game like this. But yeah, not too much to say there. The gameplay is the important part to me, and I'm sure for a lot of people for Metroid games. So that's what we're going to talk about next. So I guess the structure of the game is the first thing I want to touch on. Like with the original Metroid 2, it's a bunch of different areas that are connected to one another. Now, the environments are not interconnected themselves. You kind of go through each area in a linear progression. And basically each area has a certain amount of Metroids you have to kill. And once you do, this poison water basically starts to lower, and then you can access the next area. And there's a Metroid counter on the bottom right of the screen letting you know how many Metroids are left in any given area. It will also light up red when you're close to one, which I liked quite a bit. There's a cool little hint system that probably not a lot of people know, where if you're kind of lost, if you go back to the plate that you stand on to activate the water rising up and down, it will show on the map where the next Metroid would be for you to find. So I like that as well. The game never tells you about it. You'd have to kind of go out of your way to kind of discover it, but it's there for people that might get stuck. Now, the environments are huge in this game. Like, they are massive, and that's one of the biggest changes compared to the original Metroid 2. Absolutely huge, like so many different pathways to find like these Metroids in. The environment design, I must admit, it's a little samey from area to area, and it's a little lame that they're just called Area 1, Area 2, and Area 3, but they're pretty fun to explore. Like the original Metroid, it's quite a linear game. You can backtrack at any point, but it's one of those games where it's much better to do it at the end, where you have all your abilities, and then you can kind of go back to all the areas and get all the items. There's actually a teleport system in this game, which is new for Metroid, kind of. But it's honestly a smart decision for this game because the environments are so huge, by far the biggest in a 2D Metroid game. The backtracking would have been just insanely tedious without these teleport stations, and they're spread far apart where the exploration is still there and it's still rewarding. But yeah, I definitely do like that they put the teleport stations in there. The level design overall is quite good. I do think it leans too heavily on Morph Ball puzzle sections as well as just enemy gauntlets. Tons of enemies constantly on your ass in this game. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like the level design is probably a little weak compared to Nintendo's own 2D Metroids. Well, I don't know. It's maybe on par with Fusion, but I think Zero Mission and Super Metroid had much better level design. But I also did prefer how those games were a lot more non-linear. There's a lot more sequence breaking you could do a lot more shortcuts and things like that. I do think it's a little lame just going from environment to environment and not having them interconnect in any interesting ways. But I mean, the game is still a joy to play, mostly due to a lot of the combat changes, which we'll get to, I guess, now with regards to like kind of the controls. So this game controls like a dream. I think it's one of the best controlling Metroid games. I know a lot of people have said that their hands cramp when playing it. For me, that didn't happen. Maybe it's because my hands are the right size for a new 3DS XL, but yeah, I always felt kind of in control of Samus here, and my hands never hurt at any point. The game has a great sense of speed to it, and the free aim is just genius. So this is one of the new things that they've added to this game, and it's incredibly smart, especially for Metroid 2 in particular, where you can kind of aim a laser sight now to have precision aiming. Now, you have to stand still when you do it, but it's still incredibly useful, and it really changes the way the game plays, especially with the boss fights. Now, one of the parts that I just did not care for in the Metroid 2 fan remake, as well as the original game, were these Metroid fights, where they had very tiny weak points, and it was just incredibly difficult to accurately hit them while dodging attacks at the same time. So here, the Metroid fights play out a little differently, and the free aim makes them so much more fun to go through. And they kind of evolve as you go throughout the game. They get harder, they get more patterns. So they were always fun to me, and I actually enjoyed fighting the Metroids. So it's one of the biggest net positives with this remake, I think. It's one of those things that they've changed definitely for the better. Another new thing with the game is the melee counter, which a lot of people have been talking about, where enemies can flash and kind of be aggressive towards you and kind of jump at you. And if you time your counter right, you can deal extra damage to them, and then it goes into kind of a slow-mo mode where you can kind of use your precision aiming to fire like a bunch of missiles at them at once. And even bosses can be countered. So it's this cool risk-reward system. Do you risk getting hit to deal like a ton of damage to a boss? It's a mechanic I greatly enjoyed. Now, they definitely lean a little less on it in the second half of the game. You don't use it as much, basically, because your beam weapons basically plow through everything at that point. But it's still incredibly helpful for bosses, and the bosses are designed around that counter. The other abilities are the Aeon abilities. So you'll have like this Aeon energy you'll get throughout the game. I think it's Arion, one of the two. But you have 4 different abilities you can use, and you kind of tap it on the touchpad. The controls are a little weird in some sense, where to change between certain firing, it's basically a super shot, or not a super shot, like a rapid shot, you have to kind of touch icons on the touchscreen. You don't have to, but that's one of the things that could be a little annoying, actually, switching between either the switching between the ice beam and the the grapple hook. You have to basically use the touchscreen, so that's kind of annoying. There might be a way to change those, though. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd have to look into that a bit more. Let me know if you actually can do that. One cool thing, though, I didn't discover until late into the game. If you use precision aiming on a grapple point, you'll automatically equip the grappling hook. Again, one of those little smart design decisions that this game is chock full of. But anyways, the Aeon abilities, you basically swap between them with the D-pad and then press A to use them, and they use up this Aeon energy. The first ability is the Scan Pulse, and I'm perhaps a little conflicted on this. A lot of people are probably going to hate this ability, where it basically uncovers a wide radius of the map that's closest to you, basically. So it can kind of hamper exploration a little bit, but you can just not use it. The problem is there's a lot of parts of the levels in this game with bombable walls that look like the rest of the walls. So I like a lot of the old school Metroid games, but the Scan Pulse will actually let you know which walls are bombable. So yeah, it's one of those things where I used it often just so I could know if walls were bombable in any given area. But it kind of ruined some of the sense of exploration, because you would see all the paths around you, and even if items were there. So yeah, I guess one of the things, though, I did kind of like it towards the end of the game for backtracking to get all the items. This is actually the first Metroid game I've gotten 100% of the items. I've never done it in any previous Metroid game. And that's simply because the Scan Pulse was in the game. I could easily just use it and then discover if there was an item nearby. And then partially because the Shine Spark isn't in this game, which I've always thought was a really irritating move to pull off in every single Metroid game. And I'm glad it's not in this. I've never been a fan of the Shine Spark. I just think it's incredibly unwieldy. I guess other things with controls in this game, bomb jumps are really easy to do. You can basically just spam them. Space jump is really easy to do. Some people might not like that. I appreciate it. The other Aeon abilities, there's a shield that basically lets you prevent damage until your energy runs out. Incredibly useful on certain bosses. There's the rapid shot, where basically you just have this crazy beam weapons that shoots like incredibly fast. Also very useful against certain enemies and certain bosses. And then you have the slow-mo mode, which is very useful for certain puzzles, as well as some combat encounters. So yeah, 4 different abilities, all of them useful. Not a single one of them I didn't use at various parts throughout the game. And this kind of, I guess, leads me to the bosses, which I love. I think this game's got some of the best bosses in the entire series. Like I said before, the Metroid fights are all well designed, and they're actually fun this time because you can actually fucking aim at their weak points. And the way they've kind of changed them is really smart and cool, and in ways that I don't really want to spoil. But they've added some extra bosses that weren't in the original game, and these battles can be pretty drawn out, but they're fun. They've got really cool patterns that you have to figure out. So there's a little bit of trial and error, but because you have these checkpoints where you kind of start before the boss, it really helps out. So that's another thing I actually should mention. You still have your save points you'll find throughout the map, as well as the ammo points that give you more ammo and then recharge your health. I do kind of wish the save stations were also acted as the health refilling stations, like they do in some other Metroid games. I don't know. It was just too much on the map for my tastes. But yeah, if you're exploring and you die, you do go back to your previous save point. But if you die at a boss, you start right at him. And some people might be annoyed by that. I think it's great, at least for this game, because yeah, like I mentioned, the bosses are really hard in this game. You're gonna die multiple times on them. The bosses are definitely the hardest in any 2D Metroid game. The final boss in particular really gave me a hard time. It took a long time to kind of figure out his patterns and finally take him down. But yeah, it's one of those things. I really am glad they decided to put those checkpoints, and the fact that you can skip all the cutscenes before and after before the bosses is excellent as well. Yeah, I was really impressed with the bosses, just the scope of them. They perhaps go on a little bit too long, but I thought they were challenging, and I always wanted to keep retrying them. So yeah, I was quite impressed with the bosses. And then again, it brings me back to the controls. The game controls so well. That yeah, just killing enemies was just a delight in this game. I quite enjoyed that. So this game took me 14 hours to clear, and that's getting 100% of the items. So it's one of the longer Metroid games. I was actually surprised by how long this game is. I do think it kind of runs out of steam a little bit towards the end. Some of the areas just start to feel pretty samey, and they just go on forever. Even though the bosses at the end of the game I really like, the actual levels I thought got a little lazy towards the end. I don't know. I just as I started to get towards the end, I was like, okay, I think I'm kind of ready for the game to be over. You unlock a hard mode, and then I think there's a further harder mode, the fusion mode. Honestly, I thought this game was hard enough on normal. I mean, you don't get many energy tanks in the beginning. It's really rough once you get to Area 3. That's where the difficulty really spikes up. But yeah, I don't know. To me, hard mode just seems kind of unnecessary. But I mean, it's there for people that want a hardcore challenge. I gotta say, the fusion mode on this game, oh man, like I could see that being extremely difficult. Yeah, I'm really curious to see what speedrunners do with this game. If they find any cool sequence breaks and how quickly they can get through it. Because, yeah, it's definitely one of the longer Metroids, so I am curious to see how quickly they can get this game done. But, yeah, I mean, I guess that about covers it for gameplay. It's your classic 2D side-scrolling Metroid that's been gone for so long, and I think it's just, it's just excellent to have it back. And then, yeah, there's just so many smart design decisions that really make this a great remake of that original game. Not to do a bunch of comparisons, but I do think the fan game has better level design overall, and I do like the shorter length to that. But on the whole, I think this game there's just smarter design decisions in this game. Though I don't think it stays as true to the original as that fan remake does for the most part, just because the areas are so different in their level design, and they're so huge and expanded compared to those original levels. But yeah, gameplay sublime. It's classic Metroid that I love so very much. Moving on to visuals, I think this game looks great. I know a lot of people were, I don't know, they looked at the visuals and they're like, but it looks a lot better when you actually play it on the 3DS screen. And the 3D is actually really good in this game. Usually I turn the 3D off, but I actually kept it on for pretty much the entire game. I think what they do with the foreground and background is actually really cool with some of those 3D effects. I like a lot of the enemy designs. The environments are a little lackluster. I mean, they've got these cool little details in the backgrounds, but I don't know. They all kind of look the same. A lot of the areas just look the same, and I don't know. SR-388, not the most interesting planet to explore compared to other Metroid games, I gotta say. So that's another part of the game I thought that was a little disappointing, and although I guess it's kind of the same in AM2R as well. So yeah, I think it's actually a pretty good looking game, and I think as far as like a side-scrolling Metroid game, this is what you should do now, I guess. Those 3D visuals, but still like on a 2D plane, right? And there's a lot of cool little cinematics in this game that look pretty great as well, which I really appreciated. Audio, the soundtrack is a little underwhelming, I gotta say. It's a lot of songs that are from reused from Metroid Prime, actually, which, I mean, I love those songs. Metroid Prime has a fantastic soundtrack, but I don't know, the remixes are a little weird. They're a little more, I don't know, subdued and a little more ambient. The melodies aren't as hooky as they were in Metroid Prime. I don't know, it's weird. It's hard to explain, but the soundtrack is kind of, I don't know, it feels like it's just kind of in the background. It's just, I don't know. It doesn't jump out at you a whole lot. And I don't know I just don't know if I'm a big fan of the remixes of the songs in this, other than a couple exceptions. The sound effects are great. I really like the overall sound design in this game. But yeah, I don't know. Unlike a lot of other Metroid games, the soundtrack didn't do a whole lot for me. It's weird that they didn't go with, well, I don't know. The original Metroid 2 soundtrack is really weird if you listen to it. It's really, it's hard to describe. Like, it actually gives like almost a horror vibe. But yeah, I much prefer the music in the fan game, another Metroid remake, to this. But yeah, geez, I guess that's about it. I'm pleasantly surprised by this game. I loved it. I mean, I have my minor complaints. The level design isn't amazing. I think it goes on a bit too long. So the environments look the same as one another. And the exploration isn't quite as strong or rewarding as some other Metroid games, but I mean, it's a joy to play from start to finish. The bosses and just like, man, the design decisions in this game are just really smart and forward thinking, and it's a really great remake. It takes this original like unplayable game and makes it playable, and it's something that you can enjoy. I think Metroid fans are going to be happy with this. I'm sure if you're a Metroid fan, you've already played through this and hopefully enjoyed it. But yeah, I hope this sells well, and I definitely implore anyone that likes action games in general, or side-scrolling games in general, to give this a shot. It's fantastic, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what Mercury Steam does next. They've finally made a good game. Crazy as that sounds, at least for me. And I think if they do the next Metroid, I think the series might be in good hands, at least as far as side-scrolling ones go. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what Metroid Prime 4 is going to be like now. Hopefully that's not a disappointment. But yeah, that's it, guys. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.